I'm Kevin Brennan. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Cardiff West. Well, I think that it's quite a cockpit atmosphere in the House of Commons, in the chamber. And what would you do if you were sat somewhere and someone was talking what you thought was a load of nonsense? Would you completely ignore it and listen to it in silence? I actually know that some people think that it creates a bad impression, but I think it's actually quite a lively part of our democracy. It's quite a good thing that the Prime Minister has to come to the House of Commons every week and answer questions. In a lot of countries, the leader of the country wouldn't be put under that kind of pressure. But mostly that isn't what goes on in Parliament. Most of the time, actually, the work that MPs do together is done in a much more civilised way. But Prime Minister's questions does tend to be a bit raucous. Yeah, the rules of Parliament say that basically you shouldn't applaud when someone makes a speech or makes a statement. It does happen though, rarely. It happened recently when the Speaker mentioned that the Ukrainian ambassador was in the public gallery and everybody stood and applauded, and that was a very powerful moment. Even more powerful by the fact that normally MPs don't applaud. So when they stood up and applauded on that occasion, everybody knew that that was something really special and historic. There are quite strict rules of what you can and can't say in Parliament. You can't be sued for what you say, so you can basically, you have freedom of speech that's greater than you'd have outside Parliament, because you can't be taken to court if you named a powerful person and you thought they were doing wrong. However, there are rules about what you can and can't say about other members. For example, you're not supposed to call another member of Parliament a liar. You can say that they inadvertently were misleading the House of Commons, but you're not supposed to directly call them a liar. And if you are told off for that and you don't withdraw your remark, then the Speaker can actually order you to leave the House of Commons. Not only that, you have to leave the building and you lose the rest of the day's pay. So you don't want to do that unless it's absolutely deliberate. Well, the normal pattern for a Member of Parliament varies according to what day of the week it is. If it's a Monday, well, my home's in Cardiff, so I travel to London on a Monday morning and then get to the House of Commons by lunchtime. And then I do some work in my office at the House of Commons and probably go in to one of the sessions. It might be a debate or questions to a minister and so on. And generally speaking, on a Monday, we vote at about 10 o'clock in the evening. So we're there quite late on a Monday. On a Tuesday, we meet earlier, and today's a Tuesday, for example. So here I am, at Global Academy with the Select Committee, of which I'm a member. We meet on a Tuesday morning normally, usually in the House of Commons, but today, obviously, we're out and about visiting this establishment. And this afternoon, I'll go back to the House of Commons. There'll be some more debates, and we'll have some votes later on this evening, probably about 7 o'clock. That's what normally happens on a Tuesday. Similarly, on a Wednesday, although on a Wednesday, the big set piece is Prime Minister's questions, which most MPs attend. And on a Thursday, I generally spend some time in the chamber of the House of Commons in the morning and then travel back to Cardiff, because there are no votes usually on a Thursday. Then on a Friday, I'd spend it in my constituency, visiting places in Cardiff, working in my office, meeting constituents, etc., etc. So that would be a typical week while the House of Commons is meeting. Actually, they do. It doesn't look like it sometimes when you watch TV or listen to MPs, debating with each other. For example, I'm a member of a parliamentary rock band. We're called MP4. And our drummer's a Tory. I'm a Labour MP. We've got another ex-Labour MP. He lost his seat, but we let him stay in the band. And we've also got a member of the Scottish National Party. He's our keyboard player. So actually, you do find that although it's understandable, you've probably got more in common and would be likely to make most of your friendships with people from your own political party. Actually, there are cross-party friendships in the House of Commons. Well, They should do, in my opinion, if they don't, because I actually think that it's quite important to do something other than politics. If you're completely obsessed and do politics 24/7, I actually think it probably makes you a poorer politician because you don't have any kind of hinterland. Mine tends to be music, whether it's my own solo music or with a band I play in, along with some other members of Parliament. But yes, people have lots of different things they do outside politics, and I think it's a very healthy thing. It's not as difficult as being a teacher, because I used to be a teacher, being a member of Parliament, but it is one where you're in the public eye a lot. You're never off duty, really, because if you're walking around the streets of your constituency, people often recognise you, and they might come up to you in the supermarket and say, look, I've got this issue, can you help me with it? It's that kind of job. But it's a privilege to do that job because you're elected to represent people and to represent the area that you come from or live in, which is a huge, huge privilege. So although it's a pretty full-on, very, very busy job, it's a privilege to do it. I'd probably be inclined to say that, it comes a bit with the territory being a public figure, that you are going to get people who disagree with you, and you're going to get people who disagree with you, quite vehemently. However, the amount of abuse some colleagues get, particularly women, it has to be said, on social media, from people is absolutely unacceptable. And it goes from everything from, insults about their appearance to death threats, and that sort of thing is unacceptable. And it is a feature of politics. I've actually been in the House of Commons for 20 years, and of course, over that time, everything's changed. There was no social media 20 years ago, and everything changed also during lockdown, when basically MPs weren't able to attend the House of Commons, so had to use social media a lot more, to tell people about their work. But it's a real issue, and it's a real problem. And for some colleagues, particularly women, it's actually really offensive. I think one of my mottos is, when bad things happen, good people keep going. You get lots of disappointments in politics, whether it's losing an election or losing a vote in the House of Commons or a campaign that the government won't support. But you just have to keep going, and eventually what you find is, if you're resilient enough and you pursue something long enough, your day often will come and you'll get that triumph. So I think probably most people who are members of Parliament would subscribe to that and understand that disappointment and failure is a part of being involved in politics, just as it's a part of life. But the important thing is to keep going. Personally, I think it's important to be good at listening, actually, because as a constituency MP, a lot of what you end up campaigning on or taking up comes because your constituents tell you about something that's happening in their real lives, whether it's the condition of their housing, whether it's the law, how the law on adoption affects them, whether it's something to do with asylum seekers in the area. The MPs pick up a lot of information by listening to their constituents. I think that's one of the most important skills. But you do also need to have a fairly thick skin and learn not to take it personally sometimes when people disagree with you. People will project their own prejudices onto an MP, not because they hate that individual, but just because you're there as a figure of authority and someone to be occasionally shouted at. There's been quite a lot of surveys about that recently, and it does indicate that they feel less safe. In recent years, very, very shockingly, the last 5 years, 2 MPs have been murdered, and there have been previous attacks, and so there's a much more awareness, I think, about security now than there was when I first became a member of Parliament. And one of the features of our democracy is that elected members are quite accessible. Nearly all of them would hold surgeries and meet members of the public. It's been affected by lockdown, obviously. And that's actually a really important part of our democracy, that's true. But security has become a greater concern because of some of the incidents that have happened in recent years. And as a result of that, I fear perhaps it might mean that we're less accessible than we were previously. If that happens, that would be a great shame. Well, I suppose one thing most people don't understand sometimes is that although we have recesses, that we actually still are working, when Parliament isn't meeting. I was once actually in a TV studio doing an interview in the BBC Wales studios in Cardiff. And as I was leaving, one of the journalists in the newsroom I knew said to me, "So you're on holiday now, are you, Kevin?" And I said, "Yes, that's right. Yeah, this is what I do on my holidays. I come into TV studios and do interviews about politics." There's a view sometimes that actually all that an MP's job consists of is being in the House of Commons shouting at each other. But actually most of what's done is done below the surface in your constituency, working on local issues, meeting with local people, and trying to improve your area. And that's what the job of an MP is essentially about. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, a lot of younger MPs coming in now tend to describe it a bit like Hogwarts when they go to the Houses of Parliament, because they're from the Harry Potter generation, coming in. I mean, it is an institution, in a beautiful historic building, and it does have some strange customs and practices. For example, when we're in the chamber, we're not supposed to refer to each other by our names. We should refer to each other, by our constituencies. And when you enter the chamber of the House of Commons, you're supposed to bow to the Speaker as a sign of respect for the chair of our proceedings. And there are various funny little rooms that are relics of the past. There's one room which is immediately behind the Speaker's chair, which the public never sees, and it's called the Reasons Room. And the reason it's called the Reasons Room is because it exists for when the House of Commons chooses a small group of MPs to draw up a list of reasons why they disagree with what the House of Lords have said about a particular piece of legislation. So there's actually a room there called the Reasons Room where the Reasons Committee meet to come up with reasons. I think it's the privilege of representing, your constituents. There's no question about it. But it is also a great opportunity because you get to meet lots of interesting people, go to interesting places like Global Academy, for example. And also, the most important thing about being an MP is those two letters after your name. Because although you might not formally have any particular power over a particular subject, generally speaking, if you ring someone up and say, "This is Kevin Brennan, Member of Parliament here," or you write a letter to the CEO of an organisation or some important figure with the letters MP after your name on behalf of your constituents, then generally speaking, they'll answer you. They may not give the answer that you or your constituents want, but you can get them to give you an answer. And being in the House of Commons gives you the power to name and shame them if you don't. Most MPs actually don't have second jobs, and it depends what you call a second job. I've earned small amounts of money as a musician, for example, when I've been a Member of Parliament, but it isn't a job that would sustain me. My own view about it, it's quite controversial whether they should take second jobs, is that you shouldn't take any job that's to do with your role as an MP, working for somebody who's a lobbyist or who's trying to do that sort of thing. But if you are a qualified lawyer or you're a good presenter on the radio and so on, I think providing it doesn't interfere with your work as a Member of Parliament, it doesn't matter. What are the more unusual jobs that people have been offered? I can't think I've heard of any unusual ones, but we do have doctors, for example. My colleague Rosanna Allen-Khan from Tooting works, in A&E in her constituency from time to time, still does shifts, and recently went out to Ukraine and did some work as a doctor, to try and help people out there. Others are authors and write books, and not just books about politics, but sometimes novels and all sorts of things, as well as others who appear on TV. But where it is wrong, as what happened recently in the case of Owen Paterson, who was actually taking money and then advocating on behalf of the people who are paying him the money in Parliament. That shouldn't be allowed and isn't allowed under the rules. I am a qualified teacher, although I'm sure my qualifications are very many years out of date. But it's obviously a lovely place to work and to be a student from what I've seen of it. So I'd be happy to come back. But I've got a full-time job as a Member of Parliament. And as I said earlier, being a teacher is a much harder job. So I'm not sure I could take on any kind of permanent role.